It's your friendly host of Cinema Crusaders here on another Friday to do another retro review for you. This week, we are going to be doing The Shining, Stanley Kubrick's version of it from 1980. But before we get into the movie, I am always honored to introduce these gentlemen who are my co-hosts here on Cinema Crusaders. So let me introduce you to them right now. First, he's a fellow podcaster on Sloppy Spoilers. He's also part of Omen Comics and also writes for Revelation Comics imprint. He's my good friend, a great writer, and an educator, none other than Steve Shadewing Sellers.
All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. Kubrick is one of those directors I find very interesting. I really like his style in many respects. And he's just really off the wall with a lot of his films. And I think you can definitely tell a lot of the off the wall stuff that he's done with this movie, and I can't wait to get into it.
Great. Next, I'm going to introduce a gentleman who is a filmmaker and a writer. He's got several award-winning films on the Film Fest circuit, or in the film festival circuit right now. You may know a few of them. He's also got The Big Book of Bob right now out with 81 World through ASAP Imagination. I'm talking about none other than the man behind Warehouse 9, Lance Lucero. How you doing, Lance?
I'm doing good. Howdy. I'm looking forward to talking to this one.
Absolutely. And I know you've got a little gem to share with our audience about your recent connection with this movie. So I'm looking forward to hearing about that as well.
You bet.
Next, and last but not least, he has driven miles to get here. He is a trooper. He's an artist and a creator. He is currently working on Heritage, a new title coming out for ASAP Comics. He's a writer in Perspective Comics, none other than Jeff, Dr. Fate Bracey. How you doing, Jeff?
Here's Bracey. Had to go there. Hey, Perspectives, look at that. Yes, indeed. Looking forward to diving deep into this one. This has been a favorite film of mine for a long time, ever since it scared the living crap out of me as a not even a young man, as a child. And I've enjoyed watching many analyses of this film and digging deep into it myself. So I'm happy to have this chance to talk about it.
And Paul sitting there giving us all the Jack Torrance introductions there. Thanks, Paul.
Here's Paul.
Now all of our significant others or people that live in our house are going to be traumatized and then not able to go to sleep tonight, but that's okay. So usually we start off these podcasts by talking about the plot of the movie. But honestly, if you haven't seen The Shining yet and you don't know the plot, turn this off, go get yourself a copy of The Shining and watch it right now. Then come back and watch this, okay? Very briefly, to sum up the story, man and his family go up. He takes a caretaker position for the winter at a hotel. The hotel is messed up beyond all imagining. Mess with the guy's mind. He goes psycho, tries to kill his family, and then he bites the dust, and freezes to death while his family escapes. Long story short, that's about it. There's a whole lot more that's going on, and we will get into it. But that's basically the movie and the book summed up. Now, there are some major differences between the book and the movie, but most of it is a fairly faithful recreation of what happened in the book happens in the movie. Kubrick makes some changes, and I'm sure we'll get into those as well. Does that sound fair? All right.
Absolutely.
So, that said, let's jump right into the meat and potatoes of this movie, and let's start where we often start with our detailed analysis, which is characters. And I am going to kick it over to Steve first, and let's kick around, have each of us bring up a character. I want you to talk a little bit about one character, and then let's have a little roundtable about it, and we'll go around. And then if we've missed somebody, we'll get back to them as well. So with that in mind, Steve, throw out a character for us that you want to talk about.
Yeah, I definitely have one in mind, and that is the Scatman Carruthers character, Dick Allerin. One of the things in the background associated with the Overlook Hotel is the fact that, and where the title gets its name from, is that there are people out there with the ability called the Shining, which is kind of like a psychic ability or that's never quite explained. It seems to be different between the different people who have it. And Dr. Sleep goes more into it, but in terms of Scatman Carruthers' character, he is a character who has this ability, and I would describe him as almost like a Professor Xavier if he was not cool, if he was not a jerk, and he was in fact a cool dude. And he's played by Scatman Carruthers, and the way that he plays him is so interesting, because you can sort of tell that he's trying to be the mentor to the little boy, and all of that, and I've heard him described as what's called a magical Negro, which basically in trope terms is a character of color who basically imparts wisdom and all of that, and is meant to be like a positive example character, kind of like taken a little too far. I don't think that. I think that with Halloran, though, you definitely see some flaws in the character, or at least you see things under the surface that he doesn't quite show you. He doesn't tell you everything about what's in the Overlook Hotel. He proceeds when he's asked, "Oh, are you afraid of what's in the room?" He's like, "No, I'm not afraid of anything." We know that's not true. We know that's not true. Like, he's definitely, if you're not afraid, why are you not talking about it? Right. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
No. So you have elements of that, and then you've got to get a sense of him sitting back watching TV, and this is kind of where he becomes aware of that the Overlook Hotel is having problems. And you look around his room, and it's like he is sitting there with pictures of porn stashed around his apartment, and it's just, you can definitely tell that this is a guy who knows what he is, and he does not give a crap. He is just one of that cool older dude who just does not care. And I have to say, like, I had a good laugh at that. But he's also somebody who genuinely cares about the hotel and about the people living there. And you can definitely tell, like, one of the reasons he has been working at this hotel for as long as he has is because he is afraid of what is in these rooms. The people that have died, the ghosts, and apparently, if I remember right, the hotel was actually built on a native burial ground of some kind, and this is why it attracts all of these evil spirits and whatnot. I think that in a way, he's kind of like the guardian of this hotel, trying to make sure everything, that the people don't get killed, by the spirits. And he sees this kid who has the same power he does, and he wants to make sure that nothing happens to him or his family. And he gives his life, at least in the movie, to do that. He survives in the books, if I remember correctly, but in the movie he dies. And I've always found that a shame, because this guy, he's not there for a lot of time, but when he is, he's memorable and he's interesting. And Scatman Carruthers delivers such a cool performance that you can't help but like this dude.
I agree with you. He does survive. In Dr. Sleep, he ends up being a mentor to Danny Torrance, until, I guess, it doesn't say, but he eventually passes away. But he's the one who takes care of him and his mother after they escape from the Overlook. So, he's a very interesting character. It's almost like he's the guardian to the gates of hell type thing. Interesting, though, because Dr. Sleep makes it known that the hotel wants to eat people with The Shining, basically, even though that's kind of hinted at in The Shining as well. So it really gives you more insight into that character. I think the one thing that I'll add real quick before I kick it around to Lance and Jeff to give some quick comments on Halloran here is that I think that the magical, quote unquote Negro thing comes from the first scene that we're introduced him to. And I don't know if this was a directing choice or an acting choice, but he really, I hate to say this, but he really gives off almost that Amos and Andy vibe when you first meet him. And that's not who the character is. And so I think that can kind of rub you the wrong way a little bit. So, Jeff, let's go to Jeff and then Lance. Jeff, anything you want to add on the Halloran character from the movie? Or how released the book?
No, I don't want to get too deep in that. I'm going to jump into another character.
Well, let me go to Lance real quick then, if he wants to hit on anything about Halloran before we go to your next character. So.
Well, I think what Shade said is he's a cartoon, and I think every character in this movie is a caricature and a cartoon. They're a little bit bigger than life. They're goofy to look at. It's eye candy. It's visual eye candy. and it speaks volumes. Even if you turn the sound off and don't hear their voices, they're very animated. It's very over the top in everything they do, from Danny to Jack Nicholson to Shelley Duvall to Scatman Crothers. I mean, that's a motley crew of landscapes when you really look at it. But to me, that's, as far as encompassing all the characters in the movie, they're cartoons, and to me, that's what that was my interpretation. Even as a kid watching this, everything was just over the top and larger than life.
Okay. Let's get back to Jeff then. Jeff.
That's an interesting perspective that I never considered before, because when you look at the first character that Nicholson interacts with, really, Ullman, the director
Stuart
of the
Ullman.
hotel, he's made to look like JFK, and his office setup is even like the White House, and he's got the picturesque, yard behind him, even though that's an impossible angle inside the Overlook, and he's got his little American flag on his desk. That's really interesting.
And JFK figures prominently in a lot of Stephen King stories.
Yeah. And also to note, and I forget where I've seen this, and I forget the specifics, but there is some symbolism and meaning behind the carpet that Kubrick shows.
Oh, there's
the Overlook
symbolism and meaning in everything in there. It's we'll get into that. That. The character I want to discuss is Wendy. I'll get into Wendy. Recently, my opinion of Wendy has changed, given various viewings of the film and researches I've made into it. And I ran across a theory, please forgive me, I don't remember whose video it was, talking about how Wendy is the crazy one in the film, and not Jack, not Danny, not anybody else. And I personally don't subscribe to that theory, but it's changed my opinion of everybody in the film after watching that. Because when I look at Wendy, she comes across as the perpetual victim. And there's certain things you notice about her, the sort of willful denial of the problem with her husband, the issues with her child, and how she ignores things. For instance, she begs off like, oh, he was. She grabbed the child, and it's like something you do 100 times, and this time it's like, oh, it's a hard day, stressful. He'd had a drink, and he grabbed him too hard, and he dislocated his shoulder. But we see that Wendy is also capable of not seeing other things purposely, I believe. When she's the one who's actually attending to the hotel, as Jack's writing, you see her checking on the boiler, which has to be, you have to have maintenance on that regularly, or the place is going to blow up, which it does in the book. The boiler room is peppered with pornography, and she doesn't bat an eye to it. No reaction whatsoever. Not this mousy little woman. Doesn't even faze her. She's just going about her little duties, and she's wearing a little work coveralls like she's one of the guys. She's the last one to see any of the hauntings. So there's evidence in my mind that Wendy, I believe, I've come to believe that everybody in the main cast of this family, everybody in this family, if there is no such thing as ghosts, if there is no such thing as shining, that they are all mentally impaired. Every single one of them in the family is mentally deranged in some way. And Wendy is the willfulness not to see the horror that's taking place in front of her. And when we get into fan theories, I'll discuss this whole thing in greater detail. But that's become my new take on Wendy. She's not just a victim. She's not just somebody who's allowed herself to be involved in a relationship with a bad man who goes even worse. And she's not the heroic mother who fights through everything to save her child. She's as effed up as all of them.
It's interesting you brought up Wendy, because that was one of the characters I was considering bringing up. I think that Wendy, I'll diverge a little bit from what you're going to say before I kick it over to Lance and then Shadewing. I do think that she comes across very much as a battered woman in this person.
Yeah.
Someone who makes excuses for everything. And I will say that I sympathize with Stephen King saying that this is the one character he's really upset about. Although I think Wendy's arc really affects the arc of the whole story, and because Stanley Kubrick went a different way with the story, I think he had to change Wendy. In the story, the movie, the book initially tries to possess Danny, and then because it wants to eat Danny and The Shining, and then when it can't get Danny, it goes after Jack and everything else. And Wendy is really a much stronger character who is keeping this family together and trying to be the matriarch of this family, to support her husband and raise her child, who is a strange child, and things like that. So it's a very different take on the character. And then, Wendy is no shrinking violet in the book. And so it's played much different than the Shelley Duvall character. And
she's a much better character bit there, much more rounded. And I guess this goes to Lance's point again. Everybody here is a caricature of some sort.
Yes, absolutely. And so that's why I could definitely sympathize with Stephen King on that point. Lance, anything you would add about Wendy?
Just I think of all the characters, she's played the most over the top throughout. Shelley Duvall is a very unique looking person as it is. So she's olive oil. You know these characters.
Mm-hmm.
So
great point. Great point. Olive oil.
Yeah, just to look at her is interesting, but it is sometimes very off-putting. It's like, whoa, but you can't pick your parents. Anyways, it is way over the top. And I think she plays it the most over the top. And it almost seems like after a while, it's a Jack Nicholson, a Shelley Duvall act off. Who's going to do something a little bit more goofy or animated? And that's, what I got out of this, to me, psychological thriller over a actual horror film. I think it's psychological versus true horror. And I noticed that even as a kid, just these animated people doing these silly things, and that's what kept me mostly interested, because it's like, okay, how far are they going to take it? And they take it as far as you can take it.
Yeah. Real quick before I get to Steve, when you said that about a Shelley Duvall, Jack Nicholson acting contest, from a certain point of view, harkening back to Star Wars, you could say that the movies Kubrick give us, all the supernatural stuff, you could theoretically, feasibly be in the heads of these two toxic people in a toxic relationship, and this is just about a marriage going completely off the rails.
Absolutely.
So,
which comes to a head finally when they're now, trapped together.
Yeah,
for a winter.
Which is most certainly not what the book is about. But watching this movie, if you wanted to go there, you could make a feasible argument for it. So, Steve, Wendy.
Yeah, I will say one thing. Jack Nicholson actually had lobbied for Jessica Lange to play Wendy because he had the same issues about the character that we did. And apparently Kubrick had decided, no, it needs to be, I have this vision for who Wendy is. This is what we're going with. And Shelley Duvall is who I want to play that character. And eventually Nicholson kind of came around on Duvall. But I have mixed feelings. It's like, on the one hand, I'm sympathetic to King in the sense that, yeah, the character that he envisioned is not in this movie. There's no question about that. On the other hand, I kind of feel like there's value in an arc as it's presented in this movie, where you have this woman who is definitely the victim in a battered relationship, and she has to find the strength to basically say, for my son, I am going to get out of this situation. We're going to get out of this somehow, and I'm going to save my kid, which she does. I think that there's value to that as well, from the filmmaking perspective. So I get it. Like I get why Stephen King wasn't happy, but I can also see that. And Duvall, even though she is totally over the top in a lot of her acting, I still feel like she gets across the timidity and the fear well at the right moments. I feel like the performance is fine. I obviously didn't like the character the first time I saw it. I eventually kind of came around on it because I got to see, okay, this is what Kubrick is trying to do. but at the same time, it's like, ugh. And yeah, that relationship is totally toxic. I think that one other thing I kind of want to bring in is that the reason this relationship is so screwed up is because Jack Torrance is an alcoholic. He was trying to recover early on, and then he falls off the wagon during the course of the movie. And a lot of what we're seeing is Stephen King trying to deal with his own alcoholism, through these characters, and it's one of those things he comes back to again and again and again and again. But it's done probably the best here.
The one other thing I will say is that, to Kubrick's credit, whether you agree with his vision or not with as versus the book, he made a very effective and a very good horror movie. And I think a lot of people would almost say it is one of the better or best horror movies that have been made, and he doesn't rely on tons of cheap scares or cheap jump scares or thrills to get you there, So, and so that I think is really to his credit. Lance, to you now, what character do you want to highlight here?
I guess, specifically, I want to go back to Stuart Ullman. I mean, he plays it so straight, but even though he has that JFK look, but still, the one thing I can never get out of my mind is he's the first James Bond. 1954, made for television, Casino Royale with Peter Lorre. This is historical. It's like this guy here, this goofy looking guy is James Bond. He was the first guy to ever put him, on celluloid. It's a deviation from the entire movie, but I always get a thrill at seeing there's James Bond. I mean, it's really weird. We lost Shade Wing. Did The Shining get him? What happened?
Oh my God.
Back in a bit. Hold on a second.
They got him.
The camera
The
went.
demons of the Overlook Hotel. You're messing with my camera. Okay.
I thought it was like
that
that internet horror movie from a few years ago. Each one of us is just going to blip out one at a time.
Yeah.
All right. So you were talking about Stuart Ullman, played by Barry Nelson.
Barry Nelson, yeah. That to me that's and Kubrick has a couple of really bad habits. One is propelling a story forward through narration that's not needed, and he does that a lot in his films. But The Shining, it falls victim to something else, which is just way too much exposition at the beginning. It's all going to go bad. It's all going to go bad. You just keep hearing it's going to go bad, and every character tells you it's going to go bad. So it almost kills the thrill when it starts to go bad. It's like, okay, you're beating it, you're beating a dead cow, and then you start to beat a dead horse. It's like, okay, I get it. Just let the story unfold. And to me, it kind of starts with Stuart Ullman, telling the story about the Overlook, giving him the background. And it didn't need to go that far. That scene didn't need to be that long, But hey, why not? He's James Bond. Let him have as much screen time as he needs.
And also the other character in this movie that's important we get to see in the scene, and that is the Overlook itself. I really like how we gradually see more and more of the hotel as this guy is trying to chew the scenery and show us everything. So it's a 2-for-1.
Steve is stealing my character. Hey. No. Yeah, I agree. Actually, before I give my comments real quick, anything else you wanted to add on Stuart Ullman, Lance?
No, I think we pretty much nailed it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. The thing for me that rings out, I'm not going to say hollow, but I definitely agree with you about what you're saying about Kubrick. And it does strain credulity a little bit, is that when he describes about the prior caretaker, was it Grady? O'Grady?
Grady.
Yeah,
Grady.
Grady.
Yeah, chopping up his whole family, when he was there. Any sane, rational person goes, well, thank you very much. I'll call you, don't call me, And then if you don't say that, when your wife asks, so what happened up there? Why are they hiring you? And you tell your wife gives you the side eye and says, if you think that I'm going up there with you for the winter, you've got another thing coming. So,
Right, it was too much. It was too much. It was too much at the beginning of the movie. They could have cut all that in half and let it unfold.
Yeah. And for all of you out there who are like, oh, come on, it doesn't happen that way. Put yourself in this situation. You're moving into a house, and the realtor tells you, yeah, the prior occupants, the family was all asleep, and the oldest son got up with a shotgun in the middle of the night during a thunderstorm and shot everybody in the back of the head, and then was found walking down the road with blood all over him. Are you moving into the Amityville Horror, or are you just keep going?
Would you want to live in the Michael Myers house? I would say no.
Yeah.
I actually have some character answers for that if you'd like to hear them.
Okay.
All right. For one,
well, yeah, because you think everybody in there is mentally unstable. So
it's more than that. Just as we were presenting the film, Jack will go on talking about how he feels like he's always been here. He just knows this place. You see him wandering around the hotel later. He's never surprised by anything he comes across. It's the whole inference that he's always been there. He's always been a part of it. He's always destined to be a part of it. So he's in the mindset when he gets that story, he doesn't even bat an eye. He's like, well, you can expect that won't happen to me. Just this cheery little answer. Like a guy just desperate to get the job no matter what it is. His wife, on the other hand, he lets them know that she's into a lot of spooky stuff. And as a matter of fact, when you take a look at their home, you see the home is stacked with books all over the place. Well, Jack's supposed to be a teacher. He's supposed to be a writer. Maybe that's him. But a lot of these books are on witchcraft. Yeah. And so maybe Shelley, he talked about, hey, she's into spooky stuff, and she's got books on witchcraft. And he tells her this story to get her thrills up for hey, this is going to be exciting. You can check out this spooky hotel while I'm writing my spooky story.
And this is why Jeff is the resident fact person on movies and stuff we talk about, because I just saw the books and keep going. I never zoomed in to see what the heck.
And Jack even mentions it to the hotel manager.
Yeah,
my wife is into spooky stories. We love horror stories. We're gonna stay in the horror house.
Yeah,
crazy.
Fulfill that prophecy.
Yeah, man, that's some next level stuff right there. I didn't even consider that.
I'm standing on the shoulders of giants because, like I said, not only have I looked at this film myself and tried to take it apart, but I've also watched many videos by many excellent analysts, especially Rob Ager from Correlative Learning. If you want to see some really deep movie analysis, I recommend his YouTube channel.
Once again, I have to tell all you out there, it all goes back to Bill Burr. It's like, were you poking it?
Yes.
What did you do to make it so angry at you? It's like, yeah, if you're poking the dang house the whole time, what do you think the house is going to do?
It's like Paranormal Activity, where they bring out the Ouija board, knowing it's just going to agitate whatever it is in there. It's
exactly. So speaking of the hotel, I think we're going to have to talk about Jack after I bring this up. At least quickly.
We can't avoid him.
But the one that I really wanted to bring up, and I want Lance to elaborate on his little connection to this, but the Overlook Hotel. For all of you that don't know, the Overlook is based on a real hotel, and it's based on a story. This is anecdotal, but Stephen King says that he spent a night somewhere, and I'm not going to tell you where because someone else is going to inform you about that, but that he had an experience there, and then he ended up writing the story based on this hotel. But as far as being a character in the movie and then in the book, I think that they're two separate characters, but I think they're both effective. I think Kubrick gives you this idea that this is a setting, a place that fosters badness, that it has seen so much tragedy over the years, and you're not exactly sure if it's because of supernatural or if it's because of, they're isolated out there. But something about this place, or a combination of factors, causes people to go insane and do terrible things. Versus the book, where the house itself is a predator. In fact, so much so that eventually Jack, the character of Jack, becomes the hotel manager, which is a personification of the house. So I think there's two ways to look, or the hotel. I'm sorry, I keep saying house, hotel. So I think there's two ways to look at it. But I think focusing on the movie here, I think Kubrick does a really good job of bringing the hotel and the surroundings to life and giving you this idea that it doesn't matter whether the hotel is supernatural or just a very creepy place out in the middle of nowhere. This is not a place that you want to be isolated. You know, from the hedge maze, which Kubrick replaced the topiary animals with this hedge maze, to a whole host of other things. I mean, the carpeting, the fact that you go up into the different rooms and you see some very disturbing things. You know, people having like bestiality type sex and the old lady and just a whole host of stuff. You're like, what in God's name is going on in this place? And there's never a really definitive answer on whether it's the hotel, the place, or if it's the place has become haunted by all of the bad things that went on here. And really watching the movie, you don't care. But Kubrick does do a good job, I think, of bringing the hotel to life as a character. So with that said, I want to go to Lance first, and he's got some cool stuff to share because he has had an experience that I'm a little bit jealous of, to be perfectly honest with you. So on to Lance.
Yeah, I've been up to the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park a few times. But we just went up again last weekend, and you know it's 60 miles proper, maybe 50 miles proper from Denver, so it isn't really that far. You know, it's 20 minutes away from Boulder, where Jack's family lives, and the only shred of film that was shot in Colorado is the 2950 Bixby Lane apartment buildings. Other than that, not one other frame of film was shot here in Colorado. That mountain landscape at the beginning, that's in Montana. The Overlook Hotel the real one was in Washington State. The rest is a soundstage, you know. But you go to the actual real Stanley Hotel, which is a national landmark, and it does have all the paranormal activity that they claim it does. It's a massive tourist trap, complete tourist trap, and it's at the mouth of Rocky Mountain State Park, which is a big deal. Long's Peak is there. You can climb that peak. It's like over 14,000 feet, a very dangerous peak. But the hotel itself is pretty cool. It's been around 100 years plus. They keep it in really good repair. As long as I've seen it. As a kid, I saw it from afar because that's where we went to sixth grade camp up in Estes Park. So we all got to go past, the Shining Hotel when we were little kids, you know, up into the mountains, you know. So that's always fun. It's always fun to have it in your backyard. And Halloween's, they do the Shining Ball. They do like Rocky Horror Picture Show. I mean, it's a big, big deal tourist trap here.
And I don't want to age you, but sixth grade camp up there was not long after this movie came out, correct?
Right. You know, it was like 81, I think, 82 possibly. But yeah, this was a big deal. It was like, okay, you're by the Shining, up in the mountains.
Oh no!
Oh,
the demons got Lance.
Yeah, now the Overlook Hotel came for Lance.
Which of us is next?
I do.
Lance.
I do have to say, we usually don't have this many technical problems during a podcast, so this is starting to get a little weird here.
They didn't get me. Everything.
We're just saying, like, first Steve, now Lance. Who's
I
next?
know, this is getting weird.
I love it though. It's worked so well for this episode.
Yeah, it's the trip, right? Weird things happen. Maybe I'm agitating the spirits, but you know, you go up there and it's all about Kubrick, who never stepped foot in there, and Stephen King, the savior of the Stanley Hotel. You know, from the inception of this movie to the miniseries that came out in the late '90s. It's all about Stephen King. That's it. His pictures everywhere. They pray to him up there. He's the guy. He saved the hotel. The ghost story of him meeting Grady because he had writing block, going down to the bar. You know, all of that is all in the books and the movies. I mean, it's good fun. It is worth the tourist trap aspect of it because it's just the fun of it. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. You know, you get the whole tour of the hotel. You know, room 237 doesn't exist. I think it's room 213 is the real haunted one. That's the one.
Yeah, it's 213.
Yeah, that scared Jim Carrey out of his mind when they were doing Dumb and Dumber. I mean, they have all these stories just always revolving around Hollywood and the movies and Stephen King and the books and supposedly some spirits that wander around there. So it's a beautiful campus too. It's beautiful. I mean, the concert hall. I mean, Houdini played there. You know, I mean, it goes way back.
Nice.
Way back. And there's always shows up there, comedians, concerts. It's this nice little quaint getaway, but not so far away from Denver. It's a really cool spot. And the vibe, you're always going to live the vibe. And the vibe is just absolutely fun, especially during Halloween. You know, when you go up there and they reenact all the Shining stuff, people dressed up like Wendy and Jack, axes, you know, I mean, the little girls in the dresses. I mean, it just, it's 42 years later. And people are still doing this. And it's huge. It's not dying. Something struck a chord, and it's the Kubrick movie. That's it. That's the imagery.
I also think it's just the paranormal in general, because you know, just from around here, this isn't as big a deal as the Stanley would be for people who are a fan of horror movies. But when I was a kid, down in Long Beach, there's two things down there. One is the Spruce Goose. And then across from the harbor from Spruce Goose is the Queen Mary. When I was a kid, those two things were just sitting there rotting, and they were open for people to go see, but no one went to go see them. Then all of a sudden, Queen Mary became the haunted Queen Mary with ghost tours, you know, and now people go there, they flock there all the time. So it's one of those things. And,
yeah.
And lucky enough, you know, you walk into the grand entrance of the Stanley Hotel. It's really cool. You know, they got the old Stanley car to the side. And then there's the bar. Okay, why not? You know, I mean, they got you right when you walk in. It's
smart.
It's a very smart design, even for back when it was built. But it's just plain fun. And you know, is there a vibe? I don't know. Researching paranormal stuff in Colorado, that's only one place to go. You know, with all the old graveyards we have, and all the Native American burial grounds and what have you. And ghost towns, but this is your plush, you know, this is your plush stop, because everybody just goes there to stand in front of the entrance and get a picture. You know, even if you're passing through, it is a rat race, but it's worth it. It's worth it. It's really fun.
Yeah, and stay tuned, because eventually we're going to have a pod. I'm working on it, developing it, but we're going to be trying to visit some of those places besides talking to people who are into the paranormal. I will give you a little sneak peek. Plan on going down to the Whaley House in San Diego and Winchester Mystery House up in San Jose at some point.
Winchester's pretty fun. That's a bizarre place.
Love to go to see the Winchester House.
Yeah, it's a weird place.
So anyway, back to the Overlook / Stanley Hotel. Let me hit Steve next, and then I want to hear what Jeff has to say on this one as well. Steve, any comments about the Overlook as a character in the movie that we haven't hit?
Yeah, it's pretty much the evil under the surface. And I just love the way every aspect of this hotel is really interesting visually. And you got to put this down to Kubrick. I think Kubrick spent a lot of time making you get to know each aspect of the hotel, each room, each place. You can pick every single one out, like, you know, from a lineup. You know, you can the hedge maze, you know, the kitchen and the locked doors up there. You know, the iconic door where you have the "Here's Johnny" scene. You know, all of these things have been established so well early on, and then when they finally hit their payoff, you can definitely see, yeah, this you know, this is this is how you use the landscape, you know, to tell a story. And that's kind of leaving out the fact that the hotel itself is a malevolent presence in some level. Yeah, whether or not it's a predator, you know, by itself, or whether or not it's all the deaths, you know, contributing to it. Yeah, you don't know and you don't care. All you know is that this thing is trying to get the family one way or another, whether it's trying to get to Danny. I have no doubt that Danny being able to shine is part of the reason why this thing is awoken now and why they've gone after the family to a certain extent. Because this is one of the things that, you know, Carruthers has been, you know, in there for all this time, and he's trying to keep it under watch. Danny doesn't have his training. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, he becomes a victim, and the fact is, when you have a children in movies are often used as victims on some level. So, I mean, obviously, he's a commodity. He's the thing that they want. Mhm.
Go ahead.
And I was
go ahead.
I was gonna say one other thing. When it gets really, really creepy, like when you actually see what's in room 237, and all of this is this really dreamlike quality that you see, in particularly in that room, but also like later on, where you see the two guys in the corner as you have the river of blood coming out of the elevator. All these kinds of things that they look like it is almost dreamlike as much as it is horrific. And all of that is just like a lot of the visual design, a lot of the technical ideas that Kubrick brings to the shot, but it's also a lot of the material that King brings to the story as well. And even if they really didn't agree on their vision of the story, I think the way that it came together, King's ideas and Kubrick's execution, made the Overlook Hotel a much more interesting character because of that collaboration, even if it was one where they were kind of butting heads to a certain extent.
Absolutely. The other thing I want to say real quick before I go to Jeff is that I think this is another reason that, this is me guessing, but I think another reason Stephen King didn't like this movie a whole heck of a lot. How do I put this gently? Stephen King thinks very highly of himself. So, and a lot of the most memorable scary moments or scary elements of this movie are inventions of Stanley Kubrick that were never in the Shining book. So, and I will leave it at that. But a number of the scariest elements, the thing, and I'm going to bring up one in particular. I've talked about this before, and you can see it in my writing. Evil or scary little kids scare the living hell out of me. And because they scare the living hell out of me, I write about them all the time. I love to have them. Kids and dolls. Those two little girls in the movie scare the crap out of me.
Yeah, that's creepy.
Come play with us.
Yeah.
Well, it's the juxtaposition of something that shouldn't be able to hurt us that can.
Yeah.
So
And that
children, things that we never consider malevolent or harmful, when you make them it becomes terrifying.
Yeah. And that was all Kubrick. Never in the book at all. So, and that is one of the enduring things that you remember about this movie. The other really enduring thing is also all Kubrick. So, with that said, I will go to Jeff. What do you think about the?
I'm gonna quickly address your point on Stephen King hating the story. I think the biggest reason that he hates it, other than everything that's already been mentioned, is Jack Torrance is a self-insert for Stephen King. Now, we've already addressed how Stephen King worked through his alcoholism and drug addiction and whatnot over and over again in his writing until he eventually finally got over it all. But this character is Stephen King. He is a writer suffering writer's block. He is going through all of this. And he probably has thoughts similar to Jack that, like, my family's holding me back. What would I be if I could just concentrate on writing and nothing else? I got to raise kids and I've got to do all this. And in an interview I read, he even said at one point he didn't like what Kubrick did because you never got to know Jack Torrance as Jack Torrance. You can tell from the moment Nicholson starts interacting with somebody that he's already messed up. He's already a problem. And he said, like, I didn't feel like he got his due because if you read the book, Jack's actually a pretty decent guy who's dealing with a lot of stuff. So it hit King personally, the way this was done.
Just to interject real quick on that, and I do want to go back to Jack after we get talking about this, but Jack in the end of The Shining, the book, is somewhat redeemed. By the end of Doctor Sleep, is completely redeemed. Redeemed. So
yeah, that's definitely King having his final word, if you will, because, like, I'm alive and Stanley's not, so I can do it. So there's that. As for the hotel itself, just to delineate, the books, the hotel is built on top of an Indian burial ground, and possibly this is not a traditional burial ground. This might be even the site of an Indian genocide. So the foundations of this place are steeped in blood. This is a trope that it will become a trope of King using Indian burial grounds again and again and again.
Yeah.
one of his many. But there's a history of violence that goes into the land before this place is even built upon it, and you see that. And also, The Shining is a great source of power, as he'll go into, like you said, with Doctor Sleep, the continuation of the story. The place does want to feed on people with The Shining. It actually gives the spirits there, the evil there, more power to suck off all this psychic energy and consume it and make it its own, which is why Danny's so valuable, because he's way more than Halloran could ever imagine being. But Halloran has the expertise to sort of keep it at bay while it's just bad dreams and nightmares. And that's why I want to get into the movie version itself, because when you look at the hotel is very clearly a character, but it's a character in a different way than the book, because the book has manifested evil spirits within it. And but in the movie, Kubrick makes the hotel a character, and in a very specific way, in the ways that, like, when you look at the Amityville house and all of a sudden those two picture windows become eyes staring out of you. Here, you look at this hotel, the patterns of the carpets, because this was all made on a soundstage, because Kubrick likes 100% abject control of everything. Everything is so specific, and it's all unreliable. We're looking at madness here. You look at the carpet patterns; they are just maddening to look at. They are they sear your eyes with the colors. You can get lost in the patterns, and this floor, you're always drawn to this floor, whereas like the walls and the shapes and the pillars and all those things are kind of bland in comparison, although they do hint a lot at a lot of Native American imagery in there as well. You know, you got the bears, the buffaloes, the painting done by a native artist, as a matter of fact. So those trappings there. So he kind of acknowledges it, but I really feel like this is madness, because he's got this symbology of mazes going on throughout the story, and the internal maze of a deranged person's mind, the madness that goes on, and the dreamlike quality Steve mentions. I consider the dream qualities of nightmare, and the end of the film is a culmination of that, is the hotel really shows what it's all about. It's completely unreliable. For me, this movie is filled with unreliable narrators, including the place itself. Like I said, you go to Ullman's office, and there should not be a landscape outside his window. There shouldn't even be a window there. It's like, what is the hotel all of a sudden like 15 feet deep? How did that happen? It doesn't make any sense. Danny travels through the hotel in his big wheel, and he rounds one corner, he rounds the kitchen. The next thing you know, he's upstairs. He's on the third floor. Now, this could happen if you just take it as time lapse, but everything Kubrick does is with the greatest of intention. So I have to believe that this is the purpose. He wants to have you totally disjointed, that none of this makes sense. You never get anybody's collective perspective on what they're seeing. Every time you see a character, and sometimes even when they're all in the same scene, you are seeing a jumbled perspective. So we're never completely sure of what we're seeing. Very famously, he intentionally has continuity errors. He'll come into a shot at one angle, and then the next thing you know, you're at a different angle, although the characters are still facing the camera in the same way. Objects appear and disappear out of frame all the time. And for a man who will make Slim Whitman do 100 takes, this is not the kind of thing you do by accident. So it's all quite purposeful. So I feel like the idea is here that this is the inner workings of the mind of these deranged people who are stuck in this place, and the isolation of madness. There's ideas also of like the Minotaur of Crete at the maze. You know, Jack even starts off the road trip telling a story about like, oh, you know, people frozen up here. You know, they had to resort to cannibalism. Like, I'm going to consume my family, or this place we're going to is going to consume us all. It's all laid in there. You even see, like, when Danny first sees the little girls, there is a picture behind them on the wall of a bull. And, of course, we know it all ends up in the maze, but the maze outside reflects the maze inside the hotel. Wendy even says, this place is like a maze. You could get lost in here. Mm-hmm. And just as Jack gets lost in his own mind. So I feel like this exterior is a reflection of all the turmoil and nightmarish thoughts and madness that's just going on in these characters. and it's very evocative.
The family from the beginning they're talking about, the Donner Party, that's up in the Sierra Nevadas by Lake Tahoe. They teach at California history here. I've been up there. It is a really creepy place. So I've been to the place where the Donner family stayed, where they ate each other. So yeah, it's a real thing. I've been there. So crazy times. You're talking about madness, which I think is a great segue into the last character, and I think we have to cover. And I'm going to give some comments and then go around the horn, and we'll talk about the character of Jack Torrance, played by Jack Nicholson. A couple things about Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance in this. First of all, I don't think he's a likable character ever in the entire movie. You get the sense that he is one step away from hurting somebody or going off the handle. I just don't think he's a nice guy. And I think that's another reason why Stephen King doesn't like this personification, because the person who's supposed to be Stephen King is, a bad person. He's bad. The second thing is, and Jeff, you hit on a little bit, is the unreliable narrator here. And I think the best example of that for me, and the part that I always go back and forth on, what is real and not real. And I think the greatest scene where it really calls that into question is the scene where he goes into the ballroom with the bartender and gets a drink. And they make it very clear to you at the beginning of the movie that all the alcohol is removed, And yet here is this alcoholic ordering a drink and presumably getting drunk. And if I'm correct, later on, when the wife comes in, what he's drinking is not there on the bar. So he was having a drink, and then it was a drink. So is this all in his mind? Is the house taking this vision away? So, like you said, there's this unreliable narrator aspect of the Jack Torrance character throughout the entire movie. And it goes with other characters as well. So with that being said, let's go around the horn about Jack Torrance. And I'm going to do down to Lance, up to Steve, and then finish with Jeff again on Jack, because you were just commenting on Jack, and then you comment a little bit about what we were talking about. So, Lance, Jack Torrance.
Yeah, I think, once again, played totally over the top. And that's what sells it. That's kind of what Jack Nicholson is famous for. Somewhat being a cartoon, you see that in a lot of movies, and this movie is no exception. And considering that the film had an extremely long principal photography shoot, I can see times where maybe exhaustion would set in, and maybe even getting fed up sets in, and you take it that a little step farther just to try to get over it. Why that happens? I'll have to take Kubrick down a couple notches and say that a lot of times I don't really think he knows what he wants, because he's still writing the script as he's shooting most of the time. And this movie was one of those movies where he was still writing as he was shooting. So it is disjointed. It is fragmented. And I'm going to say that it is due to not knowing how he wants the story to come together, hopefully finding it in the editing room.
I was about to ask you if you thought he rescued things in the editing bay.
I think he tried, because if you're doing principal photography that long, you're going to have absolute natural continuity errors. It's just going to happen. So are those now happy accidents, or did they edit around it? I think in a sense, sometimes he's given a little bit too much credit for what he does. I think a lot of times it's fixed in editing, and I think he lucks out because he has the coverage. But if you're going to shoot 1 million feet of film, you're going to have the coverage. You're going to have something there. So I think maybe that's also his MO. Does he rush the process? No. But does he know exactly what he wants for his process? I'm absolutely convinced he does not, unless we go back to early films like Killer's Kiss, where it was absolutely low budget and he needed to get what he had to get. So I think, in a sense, maybe he didn't know exactly what he wanted from the Jack Torrance character. I think it fell into the hands of Nicholson and all his professionalism to bring it to life and be consistent, which he is. He's not a likable guy. His arc is bad, and that's an easy thing for a performer to stick with, rather than going back and forth to being a nice guy and then falling to pieces. So, that's my entire take of the Jack Torrance character. And I came to this realization a very long time ago, going, well, when you start to learn what Kubrick was all about and study what he does, it's in a sense, and I'll say it, it's a kind of filmmaker I don't want to be. But if you have the opportunity, time, energy, budget to do it, then why not? It all falls into your hands, and he's the man. So no writer's going to tell him what to do with his film. That's probably the other thing. Egos. He's going to make his film the way he's going to make it, however it's going to turn out when it's finally done. So I think honestly, we give credit to Jack Nicholson for grabbing the reins and creating a through line of the character, saying this is how he has to be, and it's going to be able to play this way throughout. And maybe a one-note character, but it worked.
I will also interject real quick before we get to Steve that this is most definitely Jack Nicholson playing Jack Torrance with all that entails. And I think that Jack Nicholson brings just the idea of madness to every role he plays, stemming back from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Mm.
And then, you add in this movie, which cemented it even further. Then he did The Witches of Eastwick, which was another take on Jack Nicholson. And this is who Jack Nicholson is at Lakers games.
Joker.
The Joker, right?
Yeah. So it just keeps building this mythology. But, so pretty soon, it doesn't matter what you're doing. He was in that romantic comedy with, I think, Helen Hunt. And he's still Jack Nicholson playing whatever that character is. So, it definitely is, he looms over this movie. And as his legend grew, he just kept looming, to the point where, growing up here in Southern California, every time the Lakers are on TV, they would show Jack Nicholson. And you're like, oh, look, Jack Torrance is at the Lakers game, so it's like, whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
It used to be a thing at the Oscars, too. It was like, oh, what's Jack reacting to?
Yeah.
Steve, Jack Torrance.
Yeah, it's really kind of hard to add too much as far as Nicholson himself is concerned. I will add a couple of things in regard to the performance. And one is that when you look at the guy, he does not look like anybody who should be hired as a manager for a hotel unsupervised. He just does not have the right look for that. And it's just, you look at him and it's like, this guy's going to go crazy within a few months. Why are they hiring this guy? Because the thing with Nicholson is he's playing two characters. He's playing a recovering alcoholic trying to be a dad, and he's playing a deranged axe murderer. He's great at the deranged axe murderer. I mean, he completely goes, into his cartoon as, here's Johnny, and I'm gonna huff and I'm gonna puff. All of this kind of stuff. It has so much menace and so much force when he finally becomes the axe murderer, when he says, yo, screw it, I'm just going to go and kill my wife and kid. And but before that, it's just like, this guy's going to lose it. And a lot of it is because Nicholson himself plays this persona that is just obviously unhinged. It is barely restrained in insanity, the way that this guy portrays himself. So, yeah, you got that. And I can't help but wonder if maybe a different actor would have played it closer to what Stephen King would have wanted. It would have been a difficult cast, though, having to play both the deranged axe murderer and the father who's trying not to be that person. Because I think going by the script, he seems like he's trying not to relapse. But the temptation of the alcohol, that is what really gets him. It's the temptation of the alcohol. It's feeling frustrated because he can't get his book written. And I will say one thing that really rang true to me is the moment where he's trying to write his story, and Shelley Duvall comes in and interrupts him, and he explodes on her. Because there are writers definitely that are out there that do not handle getting interrupted very well. I think J. Michael Straczynski has admitted to this. Yeah. I have that problem sometimes, not that explosively, but I have had that problem sometimes.
When the tap's on, you don't want to turn it off, man.
Right. And then so you can understand why he's frustrated in that moment. But because it's Jack Nicholson playing it, it looks like he already wants to kill her. and you know, and so this is kind of where the cartoonishness kind of comes into play, like Lance has been saying. So yeah, I could totally see that. But you can also see that there's elements in the script where there is a feeling of the Jack Torrance that Stephen King wanted on the movie, but it's just not quite there. It's just you have to kind of, you know, do the work of the movie to do that. And so you get a very different character than what I think King intended.
Now, listening to both you and Lance just now, real quick before going to Jeff, I think this gives a lot of credence to what Lance is talking about with Kubrick. And this is why I'm going to say this. It looks like originally they wanted to try and stay closer to the Jack Torrance from the book. However, it sounds to me, after listening to both of you speak, that Kubrick realized what he had on his hands. He had Jack Nicholson, you know, and the whole invention of Jack Torrance as an axe murderer is an invention of Kubrick. All of that is not in the book. From the point where he chops at the door to saying, "Here's Johnny," to him chasing them out into the hedge maze with the axe, to him freezing to death out there. That is completely.
And I will throw this out there: how much of this was stuff that Nicholson decided to ad lib?
Well, definitely. Here's the Huff and the Puff and the "Here's Johnny" line were all him.
Right. When they're giving you, and when you have 30 takes, how do you keep it fresh? How do you do something not stale? And that's something, okay, and that's where it starts to take place in the editing room. And that's where the so-called story starts to come to fruition. So, you know, this is a Kubrick problem since Kubrick started making films. And it's very evident in all of his films. And yes, I've watched them all over and over again, to even back to his very, very first ones, which, you know, I think are some of his best. But, you know, this movie, I think it was a mess, and then it was somewhat fixed in editing.
Yeah. But let's be honest and give credit where credit is due. Can any of us imagine The Shining, the movie, without Jack Nicholson sticking his head through the door and saying, "Here's Johnny"?
No, that's it. That's iconic.
Yeah, totally iconic.
So, that said, Jeff, real quick, any further thoughts or final thoughts on Jack Torrance before we get to our last segment and then wrap this bad boy up? Before the Overlook gets us. So,
yeah, as a matter of fact, what's happening here is a creation of Kubrick. And again, you got to look deep to catch it. He has purposely made Jack Torrance not a likable guy. I don't think this is a commentary on Stephen King. I don't think Stephen King himself ever caught this. But looking at, again, the analyses of some other YouTubers such as Rob Ager, I am convinced that they are correct on this. There's a lot of things going on in the film that points that Jack's relationship with his son is abusive and likely sexually so. And this is evidenced in things like he's reading a Playgirl magazine at one point. Like, where did he get a Playgirl magazine? That's already a little bit weird for a married man with a kid. But the article on the front of the Playgirl is talking about incest, why parents sleep with their children. Later on, when Wendy and Danny are watching TV, an unplugged TV, might I add, they're watching a movie called The Summer of 42, which is a reverse of Lolita, where a older woman is seducing an underage young man.
May I bring up the fact that Kubrick directed a film version of Lolita?
I was about to bring that up as well. That Kubrick directed Lolita, the ones with James Mason, I believe. And so that's on his mind. There's a lot of purple things. Some of the books, once again, when Wendy brings the psychologist in, we see books that reference child psychology, child abuse, things like that. And again, a sexual manner. So I think he has very purposely made Jack a sexual predator. And when we get to our the next section, I want to talk about why I think all three of them are screwed up and how that plays into this. Because I think Wendy's also culpable in her own way. But as far as his part, one of the creepiest and insightful things is he uses a lot of mirrors in this film. Kubrick does. And there's a couple of very insightful moments where he uses a mirror to reveal the character of Jack Torrance. One like when Wendy brings him breakfast in bed, and we're not looking at Jack. We're looking at the idealized sort of like, oh, my sleeping husband. I'm going to bring him breakfast, and he's so charming there. He's so hunky dory. Everything's great. But then later on, we have this interaction with Danny, and we see the real Jack reflected in the mirror. I love the way the shot's set up. There's Jack in the mirror. There's Danny in the doorway. And he gestures for Danny to come over, and he's looking kind of disheveled and worn down. And Danny's asking him like, "Hey, would you ever hurt me?" And I'm like, "No, no." And they're sitting on the bed together, and he's got him in his lap, which in a normal circumstance wouldn't feel weird, but it feels menacing. The music there is menacing, and when we get into other things that happen in the film, when the doctor comes to see Danny, when his mom finds him, he's sitting there. He'd start off the scene in the bathroom with his pants on. He's brushing his teeth. Now he's sitting there with his pants off, and he's got his hands covering his genitals protectively while he's sitting there in his underwear. And he has this stuffed bear, and then later on we see the scene of the guy in the bear costume filleting the older man. And so there's this sort of indication, this realization that even Wendy knows this sort of thing is going on, and I just kind of ignore it. So the Jack character is not a good person whatsoever in this film, and I feel very strongly this is Kubrick's intention. This is his implication throughout the film.
See, that makes the movie
super dark,
much more disturbing. I do, out of conscience, have to say this though. Whenever we analyze things like this, and I think we're all guilty of this, and I'm not saying that these analyses aren't valid, or even if they are not what the person intended, they can't be valid to us. But I'm always reminded of a story, and I just got to tell us real quick before we get in the last segment. I remember when I was in college, we had to read this poem about this lady who was making a salad, and all of our teachers were telling us about all these sexual references in there because she was cutting up these cucumbers and stuff. And then we had the actual poet come and talk to us. And this guy who is still a good friend of mine today, who ended up graduating last in our class from West Point, but we won't get into that. He was very frustrated by this whole thing. He's an engineer by trade, didn't want to take English in the first place. Stands up and he goes, "Ma'am, is this poem all about sex? Is this what they're telling us?" And blah, blah, blah. And he went through all the symbology. And the lady looks at her and goes, "No, I was just hungry that day and had a salad." Right about it. So,
sometimes a cigar is just a cigar.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I've painted paintings and had people like pick out things that I like, oh, maybe it's subconscious, but I never intended such a thing. But it's kind of interesting getting their input on it.
Yeah, and in true West Point fashion, he got in serious trouble for embarrassing the teachers that way, but we won't get into that. So that said, this last segment, we could really go on to this movie for a long time. There's so much other stuff to talk about. I really wanted to talk about filmmaking, and I'm not telling Lance to talk about this, but I hope he gets into it. Well, let's call this last segment potpourri. Whatever it is that you want to hit on in this last element as we go around the horn, and then we'll wrap this bad boy up. And to try and keep things brief and concise, I will just point out that once again, talk about filmmaking and how things go and how things have changed. I wanted to point out that Lance has said this movie went over budget. It lasted a long time on shooting. You had a big name director, big name stars in it, shooting on location, and wherever it is always expensive. So much so that Hollywood doesn't do it very often anymore, shooting on location. They do it on sound stages and then CGI stuff in. This film ended up costing $19 million to make, the whole film, with all those stars and everything, and was considered a huge blockbuster success, grossing $46 million domestically. So I just want everyone to keep that in mind. And when you look at now, basically, if the latest superhero movie that comes out doesn't make $1 billion, it's considered a flop. So, just think about that. Yeah, and put that in context. So let's go around the horn. I do want to finish up with Lance, if that's cool. So I'm going to finish up because I'd like you to have the last say on the film, because I think both you and Jeff have given some really great insight to Kubrick. But I want to start with our resident writer here, Steve, and hear what you have to bring potpourri-wise to this discussion of the movie.
I think we've pretty much hit most of the high points as far as this film goes. I just love the way that this movie is shot. I mean, Kubrick may have shot like continuously and all kinds of different ways, but I think there's still a visual style to it, or at least in what he kept, that is visually arresting. You definitely see a lot of the tropes that you're associated to a certain extent with Kubrick. The Kubrick stare, for example. I mean, some of the best shots are just of Jack Nicholson like standing there, looking menacing like this, and it's just really, really powerful. And you see, later on that Kubrick, develops this further. Like Full Metal Jacket, for example, is another really great use of the Kubrick stare. And there are a number of times when he does this, and I just feel like just with the way that he's able to use the actors visually, where to move them physically, where to place them in the scene, all of these sorts of things. When it's done really well, and Kubrick has gotten a good shot, and he knows which shots to keep, you really get to see the kind of stylistic film that not too many other people that I've seen can do it quite the same way. I'm not sure what it is about that, but and also like a lot of it is geometry as well. There's just a certain way he fills hallways. It just feels so geometrically true for some reason. I can't really put my finger on it. Really, maybe Lance can go into the whys of all of this. So I'm just kind of like going into what I see as a moviegoer, and it's just because of this, the way all these things are shot, it makes the Overlook Hotel more of a character. It brings it alive in different ways. The use of colors as well. Just that burnt orange for some really stands out in some of the hallways, like the bathroom. And just the general look. And I will also add, I do find it interesting that they decide to cut the movie, or at least end the movie, leaving you wondering whether Jack Nicholson really, Jack Torrance, in some form or fashion, really had been around during the 1920s. If it's like past life memory, or if it's something that he's become one of these characters. He's chosen I want to escape my reality, because I can't deal with what I've done, and I want to live forever. Basically, as one of the ghosts in the hotel, being at these flapper parties in the 1920s for the rest of existence.
You've always been the caretaker.
Yeah, you've always been the caretaker. Yeah, it's just, I mean, it leaves you with all these questions, and Kubrick never, always gives you enough to make you speculate, but he never quite gives you enough where you have definitive answers, and I kind of like that.
I think what you're talking about really gets into the psychology of colors, which are always important, I think, to filmmakers and all sorts of people, because colors definitely have effects on us, and the psychology of spaces and angles. This gets into architecture a lot as well. They can generate feelings in you and cause dread. A building can become a real character in real life.
It's very unsettling in that way. Yeah.
Yeah. I will also say, you were talking about tropes. I just wanted to add real quick. We talked a little bit about the tropes, and Lance brought up how this is the movie that saved the Stanley Hotel. I think it talks a little bit about how powerful some of these images could be for good or ill. The Amityville Horror is an opposite example. Realtors hated that film because they could not sell movies that had those types of windows for decades. So, it just goes to show you how powerful art can be in culture. Jeff, potpourri.
Yeah, I want to discuss the dynamic of the family, but I can't help but speak on the hotel just a little bit, because if you take it at a certain angle, this has the madness of a Lovecraftian horror in it, because of the angles and the colors and the overlook, how it's like an Escher painting. It's got non-Euclidean geometry, because as you follow the camera around, and Kubrick very stunningly uses some great Steadicam shots to achieve this. So you expect continuity of vision, but you round the corner and the scene no longer makes sense as far as the geometry of the place should be. So that's really brilliant. And One thing I did notice is the color red has a special prominence in the film as well, and colors close to red. As a matter of fact, when we first see Danny's tricycle before it gets to the Overlook, when we find his stuff packed outside, it's white. But as soon as he's riding around in the hotel, it's red. Again, I feel like this is, and maybe we're giving Kubrick too much credit, but I feel like this is purposeful. Just like so many of the other things. So maybe he got lucky. Maybe he's a genius. We'll find out. That's up for analysis. Now, as to the family, I've already discussed the theory that was broached that I've become a subscriber to, that Kubrick set up Jack Torrance to be a incestuous pedophile within his family, and Wendy's very obviously a dominated woman, but at the same time, I've expressed her ability to deny, which enablers of abusive husbands or stepfathers or boyfriends can be quite accomplished at. It's a tragic story we've seen where sometimes what you would assume is a victim in a relationship is not a victim, but somebody who just there are women who will literally sacrifice their children to have a man in their life. If you want that too, that's fine. I just don't want to be alone. I need somebody to help me take care of these kids, and if that's the price of it, I'm willing to pay that. So you become as much a monster as the person committing the acts when you turn a blind eye. It could be that she's in denial, and you have to wonder about that, because once again, every time we get a character's point of view, it's unreliable. In the scene Steve talked about a while ago, when Winnie interrupts Jack and he just completely blows up on her, and she, flinches out and leaves. But in the very next shot, when we see Jack, he's still got paper in the typewriter because he just ripped a sheet out. His hair is perfectly coiffed once again, and he has a sort of confused look on his face, like he's not sure what just happened. Is he not sure because Wendy just had a conversation by herself? Is she the nutty one? Or is he confused because in his mind everything's reset? So we don't know anything for sure that's going on. We can't even count on Danny's point of view because he's seeing visions. Did he really have a mental conversation with Allerin? We can only infer so because Halloran talks about it later. But on top of that,
that cat is going to get you.
Yeah, the cat's going to get me. As long as I don't blip out, the ghost doesn't get me. So we don't know, and because different things happen when we see Danny. We don't actually see Danny going in room 237, but when Halloran gets the shining, we see Danny's point of view. It's very low. And then later on, when Jack goes to the room, when we switch back, the point of view is very high. It's Jack's point of view. We can assume that we can assume that what he sees in there, this woman, is his desire, and then his horror at his acts afterward. Because this is, I believe, shortly after the scene he had with Danny alone in the bedroom. And then again, Jack gets accused, but what happens is Wendy comes back and she's like, oh, I'm so sorry I accused of all this stuff, please forgive me. But he said, this crazy woman attacked him. Wouldn't it be interesting if the crazy woman's actually Wendy? What if they're both abusing their child? And I've come to strongly wonder about that. If this is so toxic, this family is so toxic, because we often know that these kinds of relationships are passed on generationally. So you have to wonder if something happened to Jack, and then now he's passing it on to his son. And if we look at the continuity of Dr. Sleep, we see this behavior continue on in Danny as an adult, that he is recklessly out of control, and he has to get to a rock bottom before he starts changing his life around. I mean, he lets somebody die, and he leaves a child to die because he doesn't want to deal with it.
He's also an alcoholic as well. So
so there's all of that, and that story always disappointed me because I thought Danny would be better than that because he had survived the Overlook. So once again, King troping out. So at one point, I have to wonder because Kubrick does like to be ambiguous. This is a psychological thriller, not a horror. This is all in their minds because they're all savagely deranged by this horrible relationship they've got going on. And in fact, so like ghosts aren't even there. It's literally this mass hysteria, this psychosis that they're all sharing. This is why they all eventually see it, and because we never see them see the same thing at the same time, we can justify this is all in their individual minds because they're never each seeing the same thing. So it's not like we're going like, oh, you can all see the guy over there in the bear costume. Like only one person ever sees that. Now, if we look at the other end of things, are there ghosts? We know in the book it is expressly the purpose of the book that there are ghosts in the hotel and the malevolent spirits. So we can take everything that's happening to Jack as true. The greatest potential evidence for that is when he is locked in the cooler, who lets him out. Now, if they're all crazy and messed up, either Wendy lets him out or Danny lets him out. Danny's trying to rationalize things between his parents as they're disintegrating around his poor little young head. So that's a possibility there. But that physical manifestation will give you enough credence to go like, okay, the ghost can actually be a thing here. And I considered that there is one other possibility which would make things incredibly interesting in the context of Stephen King and The Shining. What if Jack Torrance also can shine, but he doesn't know it? The Shining we see can be passed down through generations. Halloran mentions how his grandmother could shine. This is what allows Jack to communicate with the ghosts, and while his wife can't, she can't shine. She doesn't even get close to seeing what's going on until, like, Jack is so far gone, the ghosts are feeding on him so actively that they get so much energy from his shining that they can kind of manifest in a way that she, the most mundane of them all, can finally see. So if this is a case that Jack also has the shining, then he could have telekinetically opened the door for himself. That the ghosts never have any actual power. You never see them physically harming anybody. They're always just phantoms, specters, shadows, memories. They can communicate. That's all they can do. So they need to use avatars. They need to use puppets. They need to use pawns. So that's my last theory, is that, in fact, Jack can also shine. And perhaps even Wendy can to a little bit, if you want to accept that she sees things later. And Halloran doesn't pick up on that because Danny's the only one who's aware of it. And, and Danny, again, another idea for the sexual misconduct here is that Danny talks about Tony, who in the book is supposed to be himself from the future, warning him so he can survive. But that acts very much like a person with DID, a split personality. But Danny, being so powerful in The Shining and aware of the fact that he can shine, allows Halloran to pick up on it. But for the other two, it's very submerged. And so I think it's possible that Jack, at the very least, can also shine, and maybe even Wendy to a degree, or maybe it's just like her fascination with the occult gives her enough awareness that by the end, when things just go all to hell, that she becomes aware of it. Because witchcraft is another thing that's allowed in Stephen King's world.
I do agree with you real quick before we get to Lance, and then we finish this up, is that even without those theories, I often thought that for one reason or another that Danny was probably dissociative, maybe because of what he's gone through or The Shining and stuff like that. So I
mean, even if it's just physical abuse, like a drunken dad slapping mom around and yanking me too hard, that sort of thing.
Yeah, which is it's common for kids that deal with that thing to have dissociative. DID is dissociative identity disorder. Worth looking up. So those are some deep waters. Whew. Now to Lance.
I had a lot to say about this movie.
Potpourri. Lance, go crazy. You don't have to talk about filmmaking if you don't want, but hit us up on how you want to leave us with this Stanley Kubrick film.
Well, I'm gonna kind of go down what Shade was talking for a minute about photography. I mean, Kubrick was a photographer. He's pretty good. And the composition of this film is what's called center edit. And he does this like in Clockwork Orange. If you notice, a lot of things are center edit. That's why it's symmetrical all the time. That's why everything looks pretty good. And editing-wise, you can't go wrong. with your eye line being screen right or screen left, you still have an eye line, but if you're center edit and you keep it that way throughout, you're going to have pretty cool symmetry to your film. And this is one of those movies too that when it went to a video in the early days after its theatrical release, it still looked pretty good because of the center edit aspect of it and the aspect ratio. And when you look at the photography, how spot on it is, I mean, it's perfect. The focus, the lighting, and no cheap theatrics other than set design. Nothing's fallen into darkness. There's no dust flying off of books or spider webs. There's nothing silly that lends to the fact that, oh, this is supposed to be scary. It's pretty much stock lit, but beautifully stock lit, and it works. The use of the Steadicam, like Jeff said, this is the first major motion picture that used the Steadicam, and how the idea of shooting from Danny's perspective as a little kid, that works extremely well, shooting from his eye line, his perspective, which gives a little bit more of a distortion to an environment from a lower angle. I mean, there's many a great shot in this film because it's just photographed extremely well, without, once again, going down those cinematic tropes of what a thriller or a horror movie should look like, because it doesn't. It looks very Hollywood. It looks fantastic. It's spotless. So, that's the juxtaposition, I think, the story versus the photography. It doesn't, you don't need dark shadows looming. Nothing needs to fly out of dark shadows. Everything is extremely well lit. Even room 237, everything is lit very well. Even the exteriors, the maze is a set. Salt is the snow. Gigantic 1K lights filtering through mist. It all gives you that foggy look, which some of us know what it looks like when it's snowing. It's pretty dang close photographically of what it should look like when it's snowing, other than not seeing breath, but we didn't have CGI in those days. So, that's the one thing that it lacks. There is no breath in all the cold sequences because it's not cold. It's in the soundstage. But the photography is impressive. And this is a movie, that I can watch just based on how it was filmed alone. It's a case study. Stock light your stuff and then color correct it later. Don't light for mood if you don't need to, because you may work yourself into a big problem in post-production. And this is a hard lesson for a lot of modern movie makers to learn. They want to be so stylized up front, they forget, well, you don't need to. You can stock light and have the film stock bring out those colors like you guys are talking about. That's the film stock. The colors are bringing that out naturally in an organic form. That's old school, but it's the best. This movie photographically stands the test of time. So, that's one thing that Kubrick has always excelled at, his photography, except for Eyes Wide Shut. But everything else, I think, is spot on. And this one is one of the best, one of his best, I think, photographed movies he's made in his catalog. So, that's the big thing I wanted to touch on.
I will also say, to your point, not just for filmmakers, but to writers out there, especially horror writers, sometimes the scariest things that you could present is the monster or the element of horror that is right out in the sunlight.
Right.
It doesn't have to be hidden in shadows. Sometimes the scary things exist right out in public.
I would like to comment on that.
Sure.
The Jeepers Creepers films, no matter what you think of the writer-director of the series, I will say that in the second film, he introduces the monster in a daylight setting, and I think it's even more effective than anything that happened in the first film, which mostly takes place at night. The ramped up action. It's a brilliant opening and showcasing the monster in a way that, like, even in a bright, sunny cornfield, terrible things can happen.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to do this movie sometime, but even Psycho. I think one of the scariest scenes of Norman Bates is at the end when he's sitting in a well-lit room
Yes.
by himself in a mental institution. So like Lance and everybody else was talking about. There are many different ways to achieve the same effect, and you owe it to yourself as a creator to try different things. So,
Absolutely.
so with that said, I want to thank you guys so much. Um, Real quick before I introduce our next movie, I want to give you guys to say bye to everybody, and then we'll go ahead and I'll introduce the next movie, and we'll get out of here. So, thank you so much, Steve.
Oh, thank you. I was really enjoyed having this conversation. Kubrick is one of those directors that I find infinitely fascinating. So I think, like Jeff said, we could probably talk about this movie or any of other Kubrick movies probably for hours.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jeff.
I'm glad I was able to make it for this. This is a film I've wanted to discuss on the show for a long time, so I was very happy to dig into it.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Lance.
You betcha. This is fun stuff, and it's somewhat of a cheat, but it's fun to be near the source of the material. You know what I mean? It's good to feel the vibe. I'm glad we discussed this.
I will guarantee for everyone out there that we are going to get to more Kubrick films as time goes on. That said, the guys here don't know this yet. Our next movie, we're going back in time 1 year to 1979 to a movie starring Max Schell and Anthony Perkins. It's science fiction. It actually gives us a vision of hell until Disney cut it out. But if you find the right version, you can see hell in the movie.
Yes.
I'm talking about none other than the science fiction, little known, or at least I should say underappreciated classic, The Black Hole. So we will be talking about The Black Hole next week. So with
Awesome.
that said,
Fantastic.
on behalf of my yep, I know you guys like that, and I'm excited to talk about it as
so
well.
Excited.
So on behalf of my fellow Cinema Crusaders, thank you so much for listening to our take on The Shining. Tune in next week for The Black Hole. And until then, we want to tell all of you, go out there, create, enjoy the movies, and we'll see you next week on Cinema Crusaders. We're out of here, guys.
See ya. Yep, see ya.